Africa is the richest of all continents. Do you agree with that statement? I'd like to ask you, how often do you think about African civilization? I remember this TikTok trend where girls were asking their partners how often they thought about the Roman Empire. And to my greatest surprise, the men responded saying quite often. So I'd like us to ask ourselves that question. How often do we think about the African continent, African civilizations? Regularly? Do we engage in conversations with our families, our friends? And if so, what is the sentiment that we get? Rage? Anger? If you're more optimistic, do you feel hopeful? Do you feel like, Africa has a future and there's a lot that can be done and that should be done? When you think of Africa, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it, maybe if you're an African, you're thinking, well, it's home to me? Or from a leadership perspective, do you think of Mandela? Or do you think of the hungry kids? The poor sanitation conditions? What is it when you hear Africa? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? Well, if you're like me, then you feel a strong sense of urgency and a strong sense of duty to not only engage in the discourse around everything that is going on the continent from a political, social, economic, and cultural perspective. You feel like we need to shift from complaining to taking action. The conversation around the challenges that the continent faces always ends in one of two ways. Either people say, well, after all, what can I do? The power is in the hands of a few. There's nothing I can do about it. I have enough trouble for myself, trying to get my kids an education, food on the table, and what have you, just trying to get by. And you can't blame people for arriving to such conclusions because at the end of the day, survival of the fittest is what's gonna trump over anything else. But permit me to invite you to this conversation where we as Africans or as parents of the continent come together to think deeply about the issues and the challenges that we're facing, reflect on who we are from a historical perspective, and come together as a community to decide on the kind of future we would like to build together. Welcome to the Hearth of Thought. My name is Karol Bell. Remember, growing up, you would hear stories of, I went to my village and in the evening, I'd sit around the fire with my grandparents, my cousins, and my grandma would tell stories. So consider this your virtual fireside. Consider this your virtual hearth where we come together as a community to discuss and figure out together what kind of future we would like to build, what kind of tomorrow we would like our kids and our grandkids and the generation after that to see. For us to understand who we are today, it's important for us to understand where we come from. So, what kind of stories do we want to tell? What kind of stories are we going to tell our children and their children and their children's children? I remember growing up, my father would always tell me stories about the colonial era. I was very young at the time. And I can't help but think, well, what kind of stories would I tell my kids when I'm old? And that begs the question, who owns the African narrative? From a historical perspective, do we trust every bit of information that we have about our own history? Or if we do, is our history being told and taught enough? Do we have that sense of ownership of who we are as a people and who we're trying to become? I strongly believe that in order for us to understand where we're going, we must separate ourselves from the mainstream narrative of what Africa is or who Africans are. Suffice it to say that enough is enough, and Africans have got to claim or reclaim their narrative, or at the very least be part of that conversation. How oftentimes do you want to, inquire further into what's going on in Sudan, South Sudan, Congo, Rwanda, and Cameroon, and Nigeria, and every other country, and every single issue that plagues these countries? How often do you go to, a mainstream source to get that information? When anything happens in the West, we get, bombarded with information, as we should, because it's important to get the people informed. But when I think of the African stories, oftentimes they could really fly by unnoticed. They don't get the same airtime and coverage, and the question is why? We could ask ourselves, well, why don't people talk about ABC or XYZ? Or you think of the Anglophone crisis, like, well, why aren't people talking about it? Why doesn't the international community say this or that? But my question would be, why leave that in the hands of other people to tell our own stories? Whose responsibility is it to report on the issues that the continent faces, if not ours? Should we remain in this never-ending cycle where we, not only we do not sit at the table, we sit at the side of the table and watch every other person but ourselves make decisions that impact us? Because whether we like it or not, every single issue or every single decision that is being made from a top level or macro level impacts the individual. So are we going to step away from this mindset of, well, what can I do about it, and become more active participants in this world scene, and as individuals or as a collective, hold not only ourselves accountable, our leaders accountable, but the international and global community as a whole accountable? And I strongly think that a mindset shift is a good place to start. And for our mindsets to change, it's important for us to have those conversations, to debate these issues, and figure out what it is we can or cannot do, if anything at all. The role of, the African Union in all of that, the role of our individual countries, international governmental organizations. I think of the MDGs and then SDGs that are failing. The UN reported that the SDGs might not meet its goals and its targets. And the same goes for most of our countries, where we've set up on paper, at least, developmental plans and emergence plan by 2030, or, whatever we call it. When are we going to hold ourselves accountable? We've blamed colonization enough, and we've blamed our leaders enough. And the question is, me, you as an individual, what is your share of this responsibility? What it is that we're doing or not doing that could impact our future? If you think of the leaders of today and the work that is being done or not done, it's important for us to tell ourselves that our leaders are placed in positions of power to serve the people, to serve the general interest, not individual interest. So we must come together as a people and say stop to certain things, and also take accountability and take action by ourselves, and not only blame the next person. If someone holds power, it's for a reason. And for that very reason, the people need to be held, or to hold the leaders accountable. So we must acknowledge that today in 2025, we're very far away from where we want to be as a people. Just looking at the migration numbers tells everything. If things were as promising as they appear to be, people wouldn't be scrambling for their lives and doing so in such a dangerous fashion. What are we doing as a people? Who are we holding accountable? Are we going to stop being the victims? And if we cannot have a seat at the table, how about setting our own table? What are we doing as individuals that contributes or doesn't contribute to the growth of our continent? So again, who is telling the African story, or the stories of the African people? Shall we merely spectate while others hold a narrative? While we bleed in silence, while we complain in silence, while we give up? Do we really believe that we hold no power? I think of the African American community and the demonstration of, where the true power lies. When a certain group of people decides that they're going to boycott the business, and you see the lasting impact, that rings a bell and it tells us, well, the power truly belongs to the people. So, as youthful and as vibrant as we are in our demographics, what it is that we can do, because like it or not, this generation of leaders will pass away, and we will need a new generation of leaders. Are we getting trained properly? Are we getting equipped? But most importantly, are we interested? Or do we think there's nothing we can do? What if there's nothing you can do today? What about tomorrow when we need a new generation of leaders? And in terms of leadership, the most recent emblematic example most people would say would be Mandela. But in terms of our leaders, it's difficult to find an exemplary leader who can say, okay, this person has contributed to, the hope of a whole nation or a whole continent. We should, as Africans, come together in the Pan-Africanist spirit. We should all feel a strong sense of urgency and duty. I think of the Sankaras of this world. If, a Nkrumah, for example, were to observe this generation, they'll probably be quite disappointed. But it's important for us to understand that beyond what was done or what is being done, there's a lot that's been left to do. And we must all come together and put all our hands on deck and get things done. For me, I dream of an Africa where kids don't die of hunger, an Africa where people have access to clean water, education, and just decent living. When are we going to build that Africa? And I admire the work of all the people who contribute to the growth of the nations. And I can't help but think we all need to jump on the bandwagon. We all need to participate in this endeavor. We all need to be actors of our future. We all need to look back in the future and say, well, I participated in one way or another. And as mundane as it may seem, or as meaningless to some as it may seem, it's very difficult to have an awakening without first having the conversations, without pausing and reflecting on who we are and who we're trying to become. I think it's not the best approach to constantly complain and blame everyone but ourselves. And it's time for us as a people to come together and talk about us, talk about who we are and where we're trying to go as a collective. So if you're like me and you have that strong sense of urgency, you feel that the tides are shifting, you feel that the time to take action is now, and you would like to join the multitude of people who are already doing amazing work on the continent to ensure that we grow as a people, then consider subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and most importantly, sharing it so we can find more like-minded people and together grow a community of Africans who would not only come together to think about the challenges, but also figure out solutions that they can together implement. So again, this is the HOT Podcast, your virtual fireside. Thank you for watching to this video. And in the subsequent videos, we will delve deeper into these issues. We would analyze them and consider what we can do and what mindsets we need to unlearn and relearn.